As a lover of books, I really appreciate JLF. I love JLF. I come here every year. I attend sessions.
The people, the vibrancy, the amount of different topics, the panels, the hospitality, the culture, everything. It's wonderful.
I feel a deep sense of satisfaction that the literary scene in India is so vibrant and so alive. We've had writers from 15 Indian languages and almost 30 international languages.
Jaipur Literary Festival is there so many brilliant things on at the same time that you can't choose what to go to. It's really fantastic. It's wonderful to be here.
People will be able to just listen to the writers for what they're having to say and enjoy the festival.
It's a privilege to be here, and the diversity of the programming is great, and the standard of the debate is very high as well. We learn so much when we're on the panel, and we learn so much when we're in the audience too.
Absolutely live from Diggy Palace.
I'm coming from 2007. When I was 7 years, from that year I'm coming, and I love so much. I meet so many authors and it's like amazing.
It's really good to see the Jaipur youth, getting so excited for this.
Passion of the people on stage. They're inspiring all these people, such an incredible turnout to listen to all these people.
I've come to this bookstore 4 or 5 times, and every time I walk away with another book.
I've been to festivals all over the world, but I've never been to a festival that is anything like it. It is more enjoyable, more exciting, more vibrant, and it's free.
It crosses boundaries and limits and heritages. And that is brilliant.
All the speakers, they made us so much clear and love for the literature more and more, and they updated us that what's the new upcoming, and I'm thankful to JLF.
And it's nice to see so many, especially young people, interested in literature. It's amazing to see how many of them just keep coming back and sitting through all the panels and taking down notes.
It's a very great thing to have this festival in Jaipur. So we come here, we get a lot of knowledge, we can cluster our knowledge here. Around 6 sessions, and whether it's Samvad or whether in Charbagh, everything together. Isn't it wonderful for each and every one to experience this? Especially the ones in school, to know that there is value in books and not always on the mobiles, sticking to it every time. Well, it is indeed the Kumbh of literature.
Very pleased with particularly how the performance poetry has gone. It's something I think we've been weak on in the past. We've had some very good sessions from the Arab world, some remarkable sessions from West Africa.
And what I love about JLF is that it makes space for poetry. Poetry is not often given as much time and love as it gets here.
Our duty, as we see it, is to bring the world to India and India to the world.
The only way to transform societies is through knowledge and through culture. And if you're able to make knowledge accessible to those who don't otherwise have access to it, that in itself is a great way of bringing about change.
Maro hello, hello ji maro hello, suno ji rama pi, aram dev ji mara ji gija.
Ah A celebration of literature in the tranquil Suneva Fushi, Maldives. Reinforcing South Asia's unique literary heritage. Spread luxuriously over 2 weekends, it brings globally celebrated authors for panels, workshops, music, poetry readings, and film screenings. Focusing on diverse themes such as travel, fiction, food, art, wellness, climate change, the environment, and more. JLF, Suneva Fushi.
Welcome to a little bit of London that is forever Jaipur.
Dear friends and lovers of literature, here we are again with JLF at the British Library 2021.
It's a particular pleasure for me to come back to the British Library, which has been my office in London for many years, and where my books have all been written and researched, and it's very nice to see this end of my life sort of double back on it.
Our amazing writers, today more than any time, because of the way the digital age has taken over, we need you to be able to make sense of the past, divine the future, and perhaps set in context what we're going through at this very point of time.
Do you feel that Britain and India can best intersect culturally?
Well, we've been intersecting for a long time. It's not that we will have to intersect. If you look at our cultural and historical relations, we go back a long way.
That may be nations or cultures or religions or sexualities, class, culture, gender, race, all those things, but that distance is somehow reduced or bridged, because we're connecting at a very basic human level.
I believe in the ability to convey meaning by the written word is our superpower.
Welcome back to the 2021 edition of JLF London at the British Library Virtual Festival. Our next session is The Evolving History of Indian Cuisine. Tanya Ibrahim, Sameer Taneja, Pushpesh Pant, and Colleen Taylor-Sane in conversation with Sanjoy Roy. The session is presented by TRS. Tuning into a flavorsome session with noted chefs and historians as they talk about the roots of Indian spices, evolving cuisine, and the future of our cooking habits in a post-pandemic world. Weaving together the memory, history, and unifying power of food, they evaluate the Indian palate and its rich tapestry of flavors, spices, and cultural heritage. Tanya Ibrahim is an author and an art curator based out of Kochi. She's also the founder of the Art Outreach Society, a non-profit organization that works with the arts for mental health and innovative thinking. She's the recipient of several awards, including the iconic Women Creating Change, awarded by the World Economic Forum in Birmingham, United Kingdom. Sameer Taneja is an executive chef at Benares, a Michelin-starred Indian restaurant in London's Mayfair. Using his classical training in French and Indian cuisine and 20 years of experience working alongside some of the world's leading chefs, Sameer's culinary style pairs high-quality British ingredients with authentic Indian spices and techniques. Pushpesh Pant is an author, columnist, broadcaster, anchor, and sometimes a teacher. He's also an independent producer of intriguing documentaries. He taught and researched at JNU for over 4 decades and has also studied Ayurveda independently. Colleen Taylor-Sane is a Chicago-based author and culinary historian. She has written 7 books, including Food Culture in India, Curry, A Global History, A Guide to Indian Restaurant Menus, Street Food Around the World, and Feasts and Fasts, A History of Food in India. She is the co-editor of the forthcoming Companion of Indian Food. Sanjoy Roy, an entrepreneur of the arts, is the managing director of Teamwork Arts, which produces over 33 highly acclaimed performing arts, visual arts, and literary festivals in 40 cities across the world, including the annual Jaipur Literature Festival. Ladies and gentlemen, you can access our sessions at london.jlflitfest.org. All our sessions will be available to view on our Facebook page at JLF Litfest and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. We would love to know your views on the session. Please do ask our speakers by typing it into the comment section. Help JLF London bring more quality content to you in these uncertain times and strengthen the community by donating to the link provided. Ladies and gentlemen, the evolving history of Indian cuisine. Tanya Ibrahim, Sameer Taneja, Pushpesh Pant, and Colleen Taylor-Sane in conversation with Sanjoy Roy. The session is presented by TRS. Over to you, Sanjoy.
Thank you so much, Ankur, and welcome to all our viewers from across the world. I'm absolutely delighted to do this wonderful food session. We've got Colleen Sen sitting out there in Chicago on a lovely warm day. We've got Sameer joining us from London, and he says it's hot in London as we speak, so there's no sun and it's humid. We have Tanya from Kochi, and we've got Pushpesh Pant from Gurgaon. I mean, the wonders of digital, that we've got all of these 4 people connecting from different time zones and different parts of the world, bringing them together to speak about one thing: food and Indian cuisine. What better way to start this session? In recent times, there's been a big controversy triggered off by an article in the Washington Post, where perhaps the author, either in jest or in all seriousness, talked about how he dismissed Indian food and relegated it to just one spice. All of us on this chat know that that is as far from the truth as we have known. And it's really discovering and uncovering much of the secrets of Indian cuisine and what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start by asking Colleen, who's written this wonderful new book, Feasts and Fasts, A History of Food in India, beautifully produced by Speaking Tiger. Please get hold of it. It's a lovely exploration, not just into ancient recipes, but also breaks some of the myths that we hear about Brahminical ways, about vegetarianism, about non-vegetarian eating, and about roasting rats. But let me ask Colleen straight off. Colleen, in your research, and you really have put a perspective to Indian cuisine, and all of us know that every 100 kilometers or every village, the same dal or the same tarka will change in the way that you serve up a dish. Every 100 kilometers, everything changes. The way you create a dish, what you serve, the kind of palate. India is this incredible melting pot of different influences, starting all the way to pre-Vedic times. Tell us a little about the kind of stuff that you uncovered in your research, and what was your source for not just the recipes that you've listed from pre-Harappan and Harappan times, but also later through the book?
Well, I think you've put your finger on the problem with writing about Indian cuisine, because there really is no such thing as Indian cuisine. It's like talking about European cuisine when you have Finland and Hungary and Italy, but even more diverse because of the number of languages, because of the number of religions. Mark Twain said, when it comes to religion, India is a millionaire. All other countries are paupers. Each community with its own flavors. And I think this has been one of the barriers to a greater acceptance of Indian food, especially in North America. I don't think so much in Britain for historical reasons, but really, what is Indian food? There's just such incredible diversity that you really can't pin it down to any one cuisine. And that's one of the difficulties writing about it. I don't know Indian language. Well, English, of course, is an Indian language. But I think what we need is people in all the regional, all the local languages to write the history of their cuisines, to eventually paint a picture of this wonderful diversity.
No, it's amazing. Exactly what you said. There's so many influences that you talk about in your book, and every century there's a new influence. There's a new power source that comes into, whether it's Portuguese, whether it's the Islamic, there's Turkestan. I mean, it's incredible, and each of them brings their very special spice or recipe that converts Indian food into what it is, an amalgamation in so many ways. But at the same time, Colleen, what was fascinating is that some of the recipes that you talk about or you've written about hasn't really changed, right? They've continued to be created in the same way, passed on grandmother to daughter to husband to whatever. And there's a continuity despite the influences.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, some recipes, if you look at the cookbooks, the books, compilations put together in the 11th and 12th century, the identical recipes, the identical dishes are being made today in Karnataka, in central India. The names are almost the same. Things like Shrikant go back for hundreds of years. So you're right, there's both continuity and there's diversity.
Pushpesh, Colleen talks about, in her book, I mean, she explores both the myth of that India was primarily vegetarian, or the Brahminical class was vegetarian at a particular point. And she really looks at everything from a soma, what did it mean? What's the kind of plant that it may have originated from? And later, how this sort of developed into other substances. Your beautifully produced book, and for those of you who haven't seen it, this is Pushpesh's book on Indian vegetarian cuisine, and it's just lusciously laid out with stunning photographs and very well laid out recipes for anybody wanting to explore. Your preface to the book is really about not just food, it's the experience. It's about walking from village to village in a wedding procession and arriving at the village hungry. It's about your mother cooking up incredible delicacies using the same vegetable that earlier you may have scorned, but when she puts it into curd and she tempers it with some spices, she just completely converts it. It's about your grandmother and her serving you all dish, but with every serving, she tells you a story.
I think, Sanjay, it sort of is a continuation of what Colleen has done brilliantly in her book. I wish I could have been as rigorous in research. I think the interesting part is my book was written not to prove the point that India is predominantly vegetarian. The kind of revenge which the vegetarians are having is fatal for all of us. But the interesting part is, what Colleen does make a very brilliant point is that there is no such thing as Indian cuisine. And if you start defining what Indian food is, it is almost like going back to Shankaracharya, describing Brahman, neti, 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 not this, not this, not this. It is not Chinese, it is not Central Asian, it is not Mediterranean, it is not East African, it is not Southeast Asian, and it is Indian. So I think the other point is that when we talk of history of Indian cuisine, we tend to forget that the only food you taste is the present one. The past is lost. You have memories from childhood to grandparents or whatever it is. You can't even go back further in the past. You have great recipes, which Colleen has recreated from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro so painstakingly that you have bones, animal bones cut for butchery purposes. You have certain grains available, and you have texts like Manusol Las and Bhojan Kutuhalam. And you could relate and see that this was the description, and maybe what was Palav in Bhav Prakash Nighantu and Ayurvedic text was something which descended from Pilav and which goes into some other dish. Now, the point is that I think Kosambi made this point very brilliantly, that in India, several time zones exist simultaneously. And talking of my mother, my grandmother, my forays into hill villages, is again the geographies and histories coexist. So Kosambi was talking in terms of Nobel laureate Tagore and almost a Stone Age Santhal village next to his ashram before. Now, why my mother cooked so differently was that she was born in Kathiawar, studied Bengali in Shantiniketan, lived with her father in the Rampur state, and when he died, ultimately they were in Karnataka. So she would use the same vegetable with a different twist, and it would still be Indian. She would say, "Ye Kashmiri dam ka aloo hai, ye Bengali dam aloo hai. This is moru with the kanda banana stem." She would say, "Oh, this is mocha cutlet from Bengal," and she would say, "This is the kebab from Rampur, for instance, or methi dal, or dal dhokli from Gujarat, you know." So I think that, and of course I carry the Sarvian Pant, so there was a pride about the Marathi Manus that the Shrikhand belongs to us and to nobody else. But then, so does the Puran Poli, and it really surprises you when you go to the arid Deccan, everybody eats Puran Poli, and it is not a legacy of the Maharashtrian domination over there. You have the interesting thing about poha. You have the poha all along in Maharashtra and Gujarat and so on. And then you come to Banaras and you have chula matar, where matar is more, chula is less, turmeric is not used. So I think this is the diversity, not only of the regional cuisines, communities, but it also is different times living in a warp sort of, you know, that you could have a dish which was made, say, it could be a khichdi. It could be a khichdi which has been cooked just like that for 1,000 years plus, because that's the way it is served in the Jagannath temple in Puri. It is mentioned in Al-Baruni's Kitabul Hind. It is also there in Vedic times as Shirika. You would have a kheer, which would be payasam paramanam, which Buddha had a cup from Sujata when he came out of his meditative trance. And you would have a halwa which tempted Vishwamitra to beget Shakuntala, and there's a different long involved story. But I think what food does to you, my sort of provocation, if I may say so, to turn a page and come to vegetarianism was that it was in fashion that everybody was eating either vegan food or organic food or trying to have sustainable diets which doesn't have animal proteins. So I thought that although majority of Indians by government statistics are non-vegetarians, at least closet non-vegetarians most of the year, but then you have majority of Indians who ate which was vegan food. Those who could afford would have dairy, ghee, otherwise rukhi sukhi, and you had lentils and grains. And you basically had a vegan diet. You had kandamul fal, which was sattvic diet. So I thought I wanted to go that route and see how much diversity you could explore in the set.
Samir, Pushpesh talks about diversity. You've, of course, created an incredible diverse menu in Banaras, a Michelin-starred restaurant in London. Your own beginnings and influences have been from Delhi. I mean, you say, you said in an article which I read where you said your parents weren't really concerned with food. Food was never seen to be your career, but it happened to you accidentally. But what a happy accident. Tell us a little about it.
Absolutely. I have to admit, I was not a very good good student when I was little, and somebody told me that, if you be a cook, you don't have to study, and that's how all started. And it's a very honest thing. My mom and dad was not very happy for my career path, but I think they are the most proudest parent today, seeing me cooking. And but one concept they fed me inside out was Atiti Devo Bhava. And this is not just line which I do for a PR stunt. This is a line which is inherent to us. Maybe my mom couldn't cook the best of the food, but her hospitality was beyond everything. So we were taught, if it's a guest, it's a god. And I think that helped me to be a cook what I am, or to be a host what I am today. And talking about diversifying Indian menu. First, Indian cuisine, like everyone in this panel are saying, Pushpesh sir said, Colleen ma'am said, that what is Indian cuisine? Actually, even I don't know what is Indian cuisine. Firstly, all my training has been French classic, then to contemporary European. It was Pierre Kaufman who said one day, Samir, in a good way, that it's half of your life you have done French food. But that Indian food itself, if you start today, it needs a couple of life to even get 5% of it. And I think the mentorship he gave me, turned my prospectiveness of cooking Indian food. And being not a professional Indian cook, I took a challenge. Just understanding, हम तो Indian हैं, खाना हमारे रग में है, और hospitality हमारे बदन में घुसा हुआ है. So just that concept took me to learn a bit of spices, maybe 1 or 2%, because talking about spices, it can take a village. We cannot even, like sir was saying, one dish could be differently executed with same ingredients, with the same grammage, and the execution is entirely different. The flavors on a palate is entirely different. So talking about my interpretation, again, my menu, I work with my menu very light-headed. So not making it just fancy, just to look at or to talk it. It should speak emotions on the plate. It should bring tradition on a plate. And obviously it should say Mera Bharat Mahan, or, India on a plate. So more and more I'm going towards Indian. I'm becoming more tradition, but somehow the approach itself comes, very different. For example, if you allow me, I wanted to speak a couple of dishes which I've created in the recent times. Like we do all the curries. Again, talking about curries, curry for me is a magic of spice. But most of the curries comes in dessert. So I use sweet spices in my dessert. And sometimes my guest asks me which part of India it is from. I say it comes from Hindustan. It comes from entire India. Because again, if I talk about diversity, it will take a village. It is non-stoppable, talk. So we do a moili curry, a very humble, simple curry with very few ingredients, and just putting a white wine in it, it gives a different dimension. Another dish we do is we make a chaat. Like I don't know any Indian who is not, maybe they don't call chaat, but it's a chaat. What my mom taught me, it's a milli-mellow of umami, bitterness, saltiness, sweetness on your palate. That is chaat for them. Then I thought, "Arey, isi ko chaat kehte hain." I can do whatever if the definition, I have to prove the definition on my palate. If all the taste buds tingle, that's a chaat. So I started pairing fish, oyster, using aam panna in it, putting lots of bundi for a texture, and serving in a bed of ice. And with a little mouthful, I think it ticks all the boxes what my mom taught me as a chaat. And that's how my learning of Indian cuisine. And we are still learning. Every day we learn. We are nowhere near being a good chaatwala, but we try every day.
Chaat is a great explosion in your mouth of so many different flavors. But I don't think anywhere in Colleen's book, which is the history of food in India, have I seen oyster chaat. So that's certainly an innovation in so many different ways. I'll come back to you, Samir. Tanya, talking about innovation, again, Kerala, God's own country, so many different influences. 2000 years ago, the Christians arrived, the Jews arrived, they had large communities, the Portuguese were there. red chili, black pepper. Black pepper was gold, was liquid gold, was black gold for countless centuries, with everybody wanting to find their way to India to be able to get to the pepper. Tell us a little bit about the influences that you've written about. I mean, I loved the whole story about Christmas and the way pork was consumed, and quite differently perhaps from what Colleen writes, where she talks about how wild boar was acceptable, but domesticated pigs were not, for example. Wild fowl formed a particular, was part of a particular cuisine, but domesticated chickens was, in a different way. Tell us about the influences that you've written about in your book, Eating with History, Ancient Trade Influenced Cuisines of Kerala.
Thank you, Sanjoy. When I started working on the book, it was largely out of curiosity and, of course, my interest and work in the field of culture. And I realized that there is something different in Kerala, because we're talking about influences of from the West, from the regions of Mediterranean and Arabia, that, when ships plied their way to the shores of Kerala, came these traditions and techniques of cooking very naturally, of course. The main reason why people came here, we're talking about as far as 3rd BC or even before that. It was 3rd BC that the Jews actually settled here, the Malabari Jews. We're talking about them coming in, searching for spices, searching for pepper, and the regions of Muziris, which is an ancient port in Kerala, and Calicut and Kollam. These were ports that, were bustling with trade and economic surplus, you could say. So when the community started settling here, the Jews are told to have come to Kerala during the destruction of the Second Temple. So when they came here, obviously they settled down here, and they never intermarried, but they had to use the ingredients that were available in Kerala. They had to follow kosher laws. They had to follow, strict traditions that they did not want to, stop adhering to. They have their synagogues and things like that. Some of them still exist here. So we're talking about them seeping into the very fabric of society and becoming part of it. So when we take an ingredient which is very Kerala, like black pepper, for example, and then you try and blend it with a particular style that they carried from the areas of the Middle East when they came to the site, you come up with a completely different kind of flavor. And this is the same with, when Islam was arrived here, and Christianity in different forms, in the sense that, we have various sects of Christianity, and we see the flavors changing from one community to another. I've written about 4 different Christian communities, and each of them actually carry different ways of cooking the same dish. Different flavors of the same dish. They have the same name, the base ingredients are the same. So these are the things that we see when, we realize that tradition or religion or identities of people tend to influence the kind of style of cooking that happens. And I think in that sense, Kerala is very unique because of the spice trade and the many religions that came here, and a very tolerant attitude of the Rajas that embraced all these new, cultural ingredients, and it all became one big melting pot, but held on to their specific identities. And I think that's what makes everything so special about India.
Colleen, coming back to you, again, you make a distinction in your book about the shamanic traditions as opposed to the Vedic traditions, and the way food was cooked and the way it was offered to deities. You also make a distinction of the earlier sacrifices that used to happen, say the horse sacrifice, and how that was offered to a later period. Tell us a little bit about that, and again, what did your research uncover?
On the early sacrifice, well, certainly it was a very important part of the Vedic religions. I mean, there was a very elaborate ceremonies that were developed. It tended to be the monopoly of the Brahmins, of course, that knew all these complicated rituals. But I think it lost, it began to gradually die out with the advent of Buddhism and Jainism. But I think also it had, it lost its popular appeal. I mean, to have these sacrifices, you had to recruit animals from the local farmers. I don't know if they paid them or not, but certainly it was a burden to round up these dozens and sometimes hundreds of animals for the sacrifice. So I think for economic reasons, it was one of the reasons it gradually died out. Of course, there's still remnants of it in India, but I think that it's just time had come and gone.
Absolutely fascinating. And again, talking about the humble khichdi, and you talk about how it's created and served across the ages in the palaces as well as in a humble person's house, and the differences there. And the other thing that was fascinating in the book is when you talk about how Humayun, when he sought refuge in the Iranian court, he was offered up 500 dishes in every meal. Was it a completely different fare that the palaces and princes offered up? Because obviously food came into their own in these places.
Oh, that's a complicated question. I mean, what is the relationship between sort of haute cuisine, the cuisine of the aristocrats, and what the common people ate? And really, is it what the aristocrats ate? Is that what defines the cuisine? Or is it the simple foods like khichdi that you mentioned? I think a few years ago, I think the Indian government was trying to find a national dish for India. And I think they finally gave it up. But one of their main candidates, of course, was khichdi, which is something that is eaten all over India. I mean, it's very basic, but different grains are used. And perhaps that still has claim to be India's national dish, if there ever could be such a thing.
Pushpesh, you talk about the Indian meal today and what that constitutes. Tell us a little bit about how you've looked at Bengal and Kerala and Punjab and Haryana, the similarities, yet the complete diversity even within that similarity.
Before I come to that, Sanjay, I'm tempted to comment a little on what the animal sacrifices which you raised with Colleen. I think the animal sacrifices were symbolic. They were expensive, they were cumbersome, they damaged the draught cattle, milk cattle, so on. But if you go to the Vedic texts, they also tell you that the vegetarian repast which you eat, the everyday food, is also a sacrifice. There is the god Agni, the digestive fire in your stomach, and you offer the havi, whatever you eat, you are performing a yajna. Eating regular food thrice a day is also a yajna. It's an offering to God. So you are supposed to take it with a sense of gratitude and a sense of sanctity and a sense of responsibility. You have the Upanishadic dictum, tena tyaktena bhujitha. Enjoy the food with a sense of detachment and don't covet somebody else's share. So this is what sustainable eating is. Coming back to what you asked me specifically about the contemporary Indian food, I think this, again, Colleen is such a brilliant writer that you go back to what she's raised. Now, she very generously says khichdi has a legitimate claim perhaps to be the national, but you keep changing national animals, you keep changing rival claimant for national flowers. So khichdi suffered when the Prime Minister's favorite dish could not be made despite all the hype, the national dish, because there were so many different types of khichdi. There was a Bengali bhuni khichdi. There's a mashki khichdi from Eastern UP eaten in Makar Sankranti. There would be chichki khichdi, which looks like an infant's loose motions, which is given as prasad in the Pushtimargi temples. You had the Lazida, the Birbal ki khichdi, which was offered to Jahangir. He was not Jahangir then when he conquered Gujarat. You have the Bajri ki khichdi and Bajri ka khichda from Gujarat and Rajasthan and Haryana. And you obviously have a South Indian khichdi, which is the pongal. Essentially, it is a moong ki dal and rice grains with black peppercorns and a little zeerakam and ghee. That's where it is. So, and then of course, of the Maharashtrian khichdi, which has neither lentils nor grey cereals. You have the sabudana khichdi. So you have an interesting khichdi, and you have the poor khichdi which has bad associations. Kya khichdi pak rahi hai? What conspiracy is being hatched? You have a coalition government which is not going to last long. You say, ye to khichdi sarkar hai. And now, of course, you have long flowing hair, but as long as I had hair in my scalp, when they start turning grey, they would say, to khichdi ho gaye baal, you know. So, kya khichdi pakri se, from conspiracy hatching to Bhagwati ka kunba, kahan ki khichdi, kahan jodi, etc. I think khichdi is, and of course, pongal is the only case of a sweet khichdi as well, where you have sakar pongal with jaggery there. So, I do think that the contemporary Indian food has an extremely interesting trait of an emergence of an embryonic pan-Indian taste. I stay in Gurgaon, you can have momos, tandoori momos, as well as steamed momos. You can have litti chokha, you can have kebab and all the tandoori dishes. You have puri bhaji, you have litti chokha, you have paratha, and you have from Tibetan to Nepalese to Kannadiga to Tamilian to Odia Mach Bhat to Dalma, etc. So there is the young generation of Indians is intrepid. They are not fettered by food taboos, and hopefully a pan-Indian thali is emerging, which is not a Gujarati thali, not a Bengali thali, not a Kashmiri thali, where I have come across a Gujarati thali, which is a medu vada in it.
Totally. Unfortunately, we're straight out of time and I have to go to questions. But Sameer, a quick one question from me and a couple from the audience. You know, Pushpesh talked about eating, but from a sense of detachment and not coveting somebody else's food. You talk about the joy of feeding people, of creating stuff. And you talk about not moving away from the truth of the true food that you feel your mother would expect you. Tell us a little bit about the dichotomy there. And I'm going to add a question to that, which is Bettina asks, can you please speak a little on if you're seeing trends in appreciation of flavor among your diners? For example, are bitter foods more appreciated amongst the more discerning?
Sanjoy, this question could have been answered in a different way. Innovation, when I say I am very close to my roots, purely I can quickly say my career. I did 15 years of French cooking, and on the 16th year I was a head chef as Banaras on my previous assignment, purely because our cuisine is diverse. There was an opportunity to bring things on the plate. It was not difficult, but using India has such a variety. For example, I will quickly assemble this in a short way, like khichdi. We in Banaras, khichdi and khichdi in India and kejri in Britain. Again, they also say it's the national dish. They obviously brought it from India. The way they make it,
or Sri Lanka,
or Sri Lanka. But the way I do khichdi here is, and we don't do for a British palate. So we use all same spices, using British ingredient, using British produce or a local produce, automatically makes that effect, automatically brings that innovation for maybe someone else, because asparagus is better here. So if I do a moili hollandaise or a curry hollandaise or something like that, which can be hollandaise for someone, for me it is just a curry, but done differently. Again, oyster chaat, for me it's a chaat, maybe done differently. I put bundi in that, I put ampanna in that. How, it's not to convince myself, and it is such a delicious dish. For bottom line for me, or any commercial angle, is a beautiful and tasty end product. Then the journey starts. It has to be a palate convincing first than anything else in the world. And India has given that platform, and it is from Tibet to Kanyakumari. I think we have such a diverse ingredients. We have such a technique. Like sous vide today, when Thomas Keller or El Bulli introduced sous vide, I thought this was my grandfather time, my grandmother time. Maybe it was not in fashion. Dum cooking is a sous vide, cook under cocotte. So when I start relating this, all influences, I think we were old traditional attitude is a modern interpretation.
Tanya, we have a question for you, which is Desi Chinese is so popular with Indians from a flavor point of view. What is it that the taste buds are responding to?
I can speak on, for Kerala because it's very, very popular here. And Chinese food was first introduced in early 1970s by a Chinese family who moved from Calcutta to Kochi. And that was the very first Chinese restaurant. And I remember, as my days as a journalist, when I interviewed the owner and his wife, she explained to me that what they did was they figured out what would work in Kerala. So they tweaked it a little bit. And nobody wants anything that's too bland. Nobody wants anything that is, overtly oily, although, you might have your stir fry and things like that. So it was tweaked a little bit, but I think it's the familiarity to the kind of pungency that's there and the medley of flavors that Indian Chinese food possesses. I think that's what it is, because we're familiar with that.
Colleen Ashish Sen asks, is it true many dishes have existed from the Harappan era? Only the names have changed. For example, the kebab.
Well, kebabs are, every culture pretty much has kebabs. I mean, basically what it is taking meat, putting it in sticks and putting it over a fire. So people say, oh, the Mughals brought kebabs, and nobody really brought kebabs. They've always been here. And as far as there certainly is evidence that the Harappans had a version of the tandoor. So certainly they roasted meat, they roasted vegetables. We know a little bit about their spices. And just to return briefly to kedgeree, I read recently that Queen Elizabeth, one of her favorite breakfast dishes is kedgeree. So this shows how truly universal that dish is, not just Indian.
Pushpesh, the question for you is, how much of emotion is cooking for a living as opposed to cooking as a passion?
I don't know if you can make a dividing line like this. I think everybody cooks with certain emotion thrown in. I'm recollecting the novel Shame by Salman Rushdie, where the lady gets even with the rest of the family by sort of cooking a bad meal for them. So it is not necessarily कि आपका भाव हमेशा अच्छा होता है, but I do think cooking is always a cathartic performance, and cooking brings joy to the person who's cooking, and the amount of passion is different with different person. Like in any other field of operation, from sex to music, different people have different inclinations, apprentices, and drives, and so is it in cooking.
Samir, last question to you. How has social media influenced food trends, and how has food evolved because of social media? And yeah, go for it.
Yes, I think I completely agree with it. Social media, not only for the food, but we are talking about food. It has connected, the connection is become more faster. So earlier when social media was not there, it took long time to understand that existed. I was born in Delhi, but it was very difficult for me to understand it was a pickled meat or pickled pork in Assam or that part of the world. But social media gave us opportunity to bring that influences within. So today, if I want to open a restaurant or if I want to eat a dish, I could have searched. It was just because of social media. It also not only gives a theoretical or a written content, it also gives a video content or a photograph content. So that makes it more appetizing, and it gives us more, it makes us more hungry to get that. And not only in India, I think the worldwide, the transfer of culture, the exchange of culture is so much. I think social media plays a bigger role in that.
Colleen, last question, because my colleagues haven't told me to wrap yet. So in terms of spices, and again in your research, were spices added also not just to enhance the flavor of the food, but also to ensure good health? And you've written about it where the head of the kitchen and most of, at least the royal kitchens, there was a person who was there primarily to ensure this.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, the head cook in these kitchens also had to be a physician. He had to know about the different properties of spices. And And of course, another factor in food for these royal courts was they served as aphrodisiacs, and that was, you find that in many of the cookbooks, and so that obviously was another function of the head chef.
Fascinating. Colleen Sen, Pushpesh, Pant, Samit Taneja, Tanya, Abraham, absolutely fascinating conversation. Each of your books and works are beyond marvelous, waiting to be made in somebody's home kitchen, waiting to be discovered in the Banaras in London. I do hope we're able to meet collectively at some point, exchange food tips, cook together, celebrate not just one spice, but 1 million spices, 1 million recipes, and most importantly, with spices and recipes go 1 billion stories.
Thank you.